King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, possessed a secret that religious authorities have desperately hidden through centuries of book burnings and excommunications. The magnificent First Temple in Jerusalem was not built by human hands alone. It was constructed by demons, 72 princes of hell, enslaved through dark rituals and bound by supernatural power to raise walls that defied every law of nature. But power of this magnitude comes with a price. The same demons who carved the temple's foundation stones whispered forbidden knowledge into Solomon's ears during construction. They taught him secrets that no mortal should possess, knowledge that would eventually corrupt the wisest man on earth. By the time the temple stood complete, Solomon was no longer the righteous king who had pleased God. He had become something else entirely, a man who had stared too long into the abyss. In chapter 1, the Ring of Power, Solomon faced an impossible problem. God had chosen him to build the temple, but the law of Moses explicitly forbade iron tools in sacred construction. Exodus 20 states that any altar built with hewn stones defiled by iron would be unclean, yet Solomon needed to cut and shape massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 400 tons. How do you build the impossible without the tools to build it? The answer came through 40 days of desperate prayer. On the 40th night, as Solomon lay prostrate in his chambers, the archangel Michael appeared in blinding celestial light. In his hand, Michael held a simple golden ring, unremarkable except for the inscription carved into its surface, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God so holy that speaking it aloud meant death. Michael's words were brief and terrifying. This ring will give you power over every unclean spirit, every demon that walks the earth or dwells beneath it. Command them, bind them, force them to serve your purpose. But know this, Solomon, the power you now hold, is not meant for mortal hands. Use it only for the temple, and when the work is complete, destroy it. Never seek to use this power for your own gain, or it will destroy you instead. The moment Solomon slipped the ring onto his finger, his consciousness expanded beyond the physical world, piercing through the veil, separating human reality from the spiritual realm. He could suddenly sense thousands of entities, demons and spirits of every rank, their presence like a vast ocean of darkness pressing against the thin membrane of mortal perception. And they could sense him, too. Every demon in creation suddenly felt the terrible weight of divine authority focusing upon them. Solomon's first summoning was almost accidental. That same night, unable to sleep, he went to the construction site and spoke a name that appeared in his mind unbidden: Orneus. The air split apart like torn fabric. Reality buckled, and suddenly a massive figure stood before Solomon, grotesque, with wings of shadow and eyes that burned like distant stars. The demon Orneus materialized with a scream that shook the ground. But then his eyes fell upon the ring, and the scream became terror. "You cannot command me," Orneus hissed. But even as the words left his mouth, his body moved against his will, dropping to one knee. The ring compelled absolute obedience. Solomon raised his hand and spoke 3 words: "Tell me everything." Orneus revealed hierarchies in hell, princes and dukes of the demonic realm, each with specific powers. He explained how demons could manipulate matter, move objects without touching them, shape stone through will alone. He confessed secrets hidden since before mankind's creation. Solomon listened, his mind racing. If one demon could do this much, what could 72 accomplish? That night marked the beginning of a systematic campaign. Solomon began summoning demons one by one, learning their names and natures, binding them through the ring's power. Each summoning was a battle, though the outcome was never in doubt. Demons raged and threatened, but when Solomon showed them the seal upon the ring, they had no choice but to submit. The toll on Solomon was immediate. Each summoning drained something from him, something deeper than physical exhaustion. It was a gradual erosion of the boundary between his soul and the darkness he manipulated. When you command demons, you must enter their realm, even if only partially. And every time Solomon crossed that threshold, a little of the darkness followed him back. Within 6 months, all 72 princes of hell knelt before him, their true names written in a grimoire that Solomon kept locked in an iron box. The wise king now commanded an army of supernatural entities, and the temple's construction could finally begin. But Solomon had already changed. His eyes, once warm and kind, now held a distant quality, as if he were always looking at something just beyond the physical world. Late at night, servants reported that the king spoke to empty air in languages never spoken by human tongues. The ring had given Solomon ultimate power. But the price was only beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 2. The 72 Demons. The grimoire Solomon compiled became known in later centuries as the Ars Goetia, documenting every demon he had bound, their appearances, abilities, and the specific seals required to summon and control them. This was not simply a list, but a complete demonic hierarchy, a government of hell laid bare. Amemon, king of the south, manifested with a crown of iron and a scepter of human bone. His presence brought madness to weak minds. 2 of Solomon's scribes died from sheer terror witnessing Amemon's summoning. This demon controlled knowledge of hidden things, treasures buried beneath earth, seams of gold running through bedrock. He could see through solid matter and map precise locations for foundation stones. But every question answered by Amemon planted seeds of paranoia in Solomon's mind. Corson, king of the west, appeared as writhing serpents, occasionally coalescing into something vaguely humanoid. He commanded water and could divine underground springs, crucial for the temple's purification systems. His voice sounded like drowning. Solomon used Corson to locate exact water sources that would feed the great Bronze Sea and the ceremonial lavers. Ziminiar, king of the north, was perhaps most unsettling. He rarely took physical form, appearing instead as a cold absence of light that made mortal flesh ache. He governed time and decay, possessing knowledge of how to preserve materials against age. The cedar wood from Lebanon would last millennia because of Ziminiar's whispered incantations, though Solomon noticed he felt older after each interaction, as if years were being stolen. Beneath the 4 kings served the 72 princes, each with specific domains. Baal could make workers invisible, allowing materials to move through Jerusalem without attention. Paimon possessed knowledge of all arts and sciences, teaching Solomon the sacred geometry that would make the temple's proportions mathematically perfect. Belith commanded manipulation of emotion, maintaining morale among exhausted human workers, but his influence made them unnaturally devoted, unable to leave even when they desperately wanted to. Each demon brought not just labor, but knowledge, and this was where true danger lay. Demons do not think like humans. Their logic follows patterns that corrode mortal understanding. As Solomon spent more time commanding his demonic workforce, he found himself thinking in ways that felt alien, viewing problems through perspectives fundamentally inhuman. The most dangerous was Azazel, a fallen watcher, one of the angels who descended in Enoch's time. Azazel appeared in Solomon's dreams, bypassing the ring's authority, already bound by God beneath desert rocks. He could not physically serve, but he could speak, and what he spoke changed everything. Azazel taught Solomon the deepest secrets, true names of other angels, patterns underlying reality itself. He explained how creation worked from inside, how death was merely a transition that could be manipulated. Solomon tried to resist these teachings. He knew they were corrupting him, could feel his soul darkening with each revelation. But the knowledge was intoxicating, and more importantly, useful. The temple grew more magnificent with each secret applied. Solomon justified every compromise, telling himself it was for God's glory, that the end justified the means. But late at night, alone with only the ring and his grimoire, Solomon would look at his hands and no longer recognize them. They had commanded too much evil. The demons obeyed him, yes, but obedience and influence are not the same thing. Every command required him to think like a demon, to understand their logic and adopt their perspective. Slowly, Solomon found he could no longer remember how to think any other way. The 72 demons built the temple, but they were rebuilding Solomon in the process, shaping him into something no longer entirely human. Chapter 3. Building the impossible. Solomon divided his demonic workforce by specific abilities. The demon Belial commanded legions with power to soften stone through touch. Workers reported seeing entities place hands upon solid rock faces and watching the stone become momentarily fluid, allowing shapes to be molded rather than carved. When demons removed their hands, stone returned to solid state, perfectly shaped and impossibly smooth. This left no tool marks because no tools were used. Transportation presented the next impossibility. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons needed to move several miles through hilly terrain. Solomon assigned this to aerial demons, spirits who existed partially outside normal space and could manipulate gravity itself. Witnesses reported seeing massive stones floating through air at night, moving silently above roads, guided by invisible forces only Solomon could see and command. These nighttime transports were kept secret as much as possible, but rumors spread. People spoke of walking home after dark and seeing shadows too large that moved wrong, of hearing sounds like wind through vast wings when air was perfectly still, of feeling sudden cold that made breath visible even in summer. Parents kept children indoors after sunset. Travelers avoided roads between quarries in Jerusalem during dark hours. Demons worked fastest at night when darkness gave them more power and the barrier between worlds grew thinner. Solomon established a schedule where human workers labored during daylight on normal tasks, while the demonic workforce handled impossible tasks under darkness. This meant Solomon had to be present every night, directing demons through sheer will, backed by the ring's authority. The king went months without proper sleep, surviving on brief naps while his body slowly deteriorated. The temple's most impressive feature was the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary where the ark would rest. This chamber was a perfect cube, 20 cubits in length, width, and height, lined with cedar and overlaid with pure gold. The mathematical precision required was far beyond ancient construction capabilities. Solomon assigned the demon Paimon to oversee this work, as Paimon possessed complete knowledge of sacred geometry. Paimon taught Solomon that certain geometric ratios created resonances between material and spiritual worlds, essentially turning architecture into an antenna that could receive or broadcast spiritual energy. The temple was not merely a building, but a machine designed to focus divine presence into a single point in physical space. Every measurement, every angle, every proportion was calculated to create this effect. The famous bronze sea, an enormous basin supported by 12 bronze oxen holding between 10,000 and 45,000 gallons, presented another impossibility. Bronze casting on the scale required temperatures and techniques that should not have existed in Solomon's era. The demon Asmodeus supervised this work, breathing supernatural fire that burned far hotter than any natural flame. The molten bronze flowed like water under his direction, filling molds perfectly without air pockets or impurities. Workers assigned to bronze work reported strange phenomena. The metal seemed alive as it melted, writhing and twisting in patterns suggesting consciousness. Some swore they saw faces forming in the molten surface, screaming silently before dissolving back into liquid. 3 workers died when splashes of bronze leaped from crucibles as if deliberately targeting them. Solomon had their bodies removed quietly and gave their families generous payments to buy silence. The most disturbing aspect was not what demons built, but what they built into the structure. Hidden features that served purposes Solomon himself did not fully understand. Demons incorporated elements that would only become relevant centuries later. Secret chambers beneath the foundation, passages leading to underground springs and caves, geometric alignments pointing towards celestial phenomena that would not occur for thousands of years. When Solomon demanded answers, demons would only smile and say they were following the pattern they had been commanded to follow, the same pattern existing in the heavenly temple they had seen before their fall. This terrified Solomon more than any direct threat. It implied demons retained memories of heaven, of sacred patterns in the celestial realm, and were incorporating those patterns into the physical temple. But they were also fallen, corrupted, their knowledge twisted by millennia of rebellion. By the time the temple neared completion, after 7 years of construction, Solomon had stopped questioning demonic methods. He was too deep, too committed, too transformed by constant exposure to their influence. The man who began this project as a righteous king now spent nights conversing with princes of hell as if they were trusted advisors. The temple stood complete, more magnificent than any human structure in history, impossible in its perfection, terrifying in its power. But Solomon had paid a price far greater than the massive financial cost. He had given away pieces of his soul to buy that magnificence, and there was no getting them back. Chapter 4. The price of forbidden knowledge. Once the temple was complete, Solomon should have destroyed the ring and dismissed the demons. Michael had explicitly warned him to use the power only for the temple and then relinquish it. But Solomon did not. He had spent 7 years commanding the princes of hell, learning their secrets, growing accustomed to power that made him more than human. The thought of returning to being merely a mortal king had become unthinkable. Solomon kept the ring. He kept the grimoire. And he kept summoning demons, now for personal projects having nothing to do with serving God. This was the moment of his fall, though he did not recognize it. To Solomon, keeping the ring seemed logical, even responsible. He had knowledge that could benefit his kingdom, understanding of arts and sciences that would make Israel the greatest nation on earth. Why abandon such advantages? The demons had been waiting for this moment. 7 years of forced servitude had been humiliating for entities accustomed to being worshipped and feared. They had built Solomon's temple, because the ring left them no choice. But they had also been planting seeds, teaching Solomon things he should not know, introducing thought patterns that would corrupt him over time. Now that Solomon chose to keep commanding them, those seeds began to sprout. The first sign was subtle. Solomon's appetite for knowledge became insatiable. He summoned demons, not to perform tasks, but simply to learn from them, to extract information about history, magic, hidden structures underlying reality. Asmodeus taught him rituals for gaining wealth and power. Paimon revealed philosophical truths that undermined biblical teaching, introducing doubts about God's nature. Sitri showed Solomon methods of seduction and manipulation that he began practicing on those around him. Solomon's legendary wisdom twisted into something else. He became cunning rather than wise, manipulative rather than fair, obsessed with control rather than justice. His judgments grew harsh and cruel. When 2 women came before him claiming the same child, his famous solution of threatening to cut the baby in half was not wisdom but psychological torture to achieve his ends. The 700 wives and 300 concubines mentioned in 1 Kings were not simply political marriages. Solomon had learned from demons how to create obsession, how to manipulate human emotion through subtle spiritual influence. Women who entered his presence found themselves inexplicably drawn to him, unable to resist an attraction that felt natural but was actually induced. Solomon collected women the way he collected knowledge, obsessively, compulsively, unable to stop. Worse, many were foreigners who brought their gods and practices with them. 1 Kings recounts that Solomon's foreign wives turned his heart after other gods. The Testament reveals it was intentional. Demons had taught Solomon that all gods were real in some sense, different manifestations of spiritual power that could be harnessed and controlled. Solomon began building shrines to Ashtaroth, Molech, and Chemosh, not because he had abandoned God, but because he believed he could command and utilize the power of all deities simultaneously. This was perhaps the most insidious corruption. Solomon convinced himself he was not betraying God, but expanding his understanding that worshiping other gods was simply spiritual research. Demons encouraged this thinking because it was technically true from a twisted perspective. The beings humans worshipped as foreign gods were often actually demons, wearing divine masks. Every shrine Solomon built strengthened demonic influence over him and his kingdom. The Testament reveals his growing paranoia and moral decay. Solomon became suspicious of everyone, certain his subjects were plotting against him. He used demons to spy on his court, learning secrets no king should know, discovering betrayals both real and imagined. Servants lived in terror. Trust evaporated from the kingdom as everyone became aware that demons watched and listened to everything. Solomon's relationship with God deteriorated proportionally to his deepening relationship with the demonic realm. The prophet Ahijah eventually confronted Solomon, declaring that because of his apostasy, the kingdom would be torn away from his descendants. This prophecy would come true after Solomon's death, when Israel split into 2 kingdoms that would both eventually fall to conquest. The magnificent temple Solomon built would be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, looted and burned, its stones scattered. But before that far future, Solomon faced a more immediate consequence. The ring that had given him power over demons was also binding him to them. The relationship had inverted. He thought he commanded them, but they were actually reshaping him, turning him into something that could eventually be controlled. The Testament describes Solomon's growing horror as he realized what was happening, how he tried to break free, and found he no longer possessed the moral strength to do so. The Testament ends with Solomon's confession of his failures, his warning to future generations about the danger of commanding demons even with divine authority. He wrote these words as a broken man, stripped of the joy and righteousness he once possessed, aware that he had squandered the greatest gift any king had ever received. The text concludes with instructions for summoning and binding the 72 demons, their names and seals recorded in meticulous detail. And this is precisely why religious authorities condemned and banned the Testament. Because Solomon had not just written a confession, he had written an instruction manual. For 2,000 years, church fathers understood the danger immediately. If people knew the true names and binding seals of demons, if they learned the rituals Solomon used, they might attempt to replicate his work. And unlike Solomon, who at least began with divine sanction, these would-be sorcerers would have no protection, no ring gifted by angels, no special favor from God. They would summon entities they could not control and unleash horrors upon the world. The Testament of Solomon was declared apocryphal, removed from biblical canons, hidden in monastery libraries. Multiple church councils condemned anyone who read or copied the text. Islamic authorities forbade its study. Jewish rabbis warned against its contents. Yet the manuscript survived, precisely because its power made it valuable to those willing to risk damnation for knowledge. Throughout history, secret societies and occult practitioners sought copies. The Knights Templar allegedly possessed a version, which may explain both their sudden wealth and their eventual destruction. Medieval grimoires like the Lesser Key of Solomon drew heavily from the Testament's demon catalogs. Alchemists and magicians across Europe incorporated Solomonic seals and names into their rituals, often with disastrous results. The first temple is gone, destroyed 2,600 years ago. But the knowledge Solomon gained while building it persists, locked in forbidden texts that religious authorities can suppress but never fully eliminate. The 72 demons that built the temple still exist, still respond to their names when spoken by those with the knowledge and will to command them. This is why the secret writings of Solomon remain forbidden. Not because they are false, but because they are true. Not because they are powerless, but because they work. The demons that built the first temple can be summoned and bound, but Solomon's own testimony proves that commanding demons does not make you their master. It makes you their student, their victim, their eventually willing servant. The wisest king who ever lived learned too late that some knowledge carries a cost that no mortal can afford to pay. His temple stood for 4 centuries before falling to human conquest. But the corruption that building it inflicted upon Solomon's soul lasted until his death, and echoes still in every occult text that bears his name, every seal copied from his grimoire, every ritual performed by practitioners who think they can succeed where Solomon failed. They cannot. The price is always the same. The only question is how long it takes to collect.